In 2015, a team at the University of Oxford published the most detailed genetic map of Britain ever assembled. 2,039 people, everyone chosen because all four of their grandparents were born within 80 kilometers of one another, about 50 miles, set against 6,209 continental Europeans. The lead author was Stephen Leslie. The senior authors were Peter Donnelly and Sir Walter Bodmer. It ran in Nature. It is called The People of the British Isles. Among many other things, that team went looking for the Vikings. They went looking for the Danelaw. Northern and eastern England, the country that fell under Scandinavian rule after the great heathen army came ashore in the year 865, Lincolnshire, Yorkshire, the 5 boroughs. A landscape so thickly seeded with Norse place names that you can read the settlement off a road atlas. They did not find it. The paper states it without softening. There is, in their words, no clear genetic evidence of the Danish Viking occupation and control of a large part of England, either in separate United Kingdom clusters in that region or in estimated ancestry profiles. 2,039 of the most deeply rooted rural genomes in Britain, and the Danelaw was not there. Now hold that against what the same analysis did on the same day. The same team resolved the largest Orkney cluster as carrying about 25% of its DNA from groups in Norway, from an admixture event the method could actually date. It separated the Welsh from the English. It separated Cornwall from Devon. It separated North Pembrokeshire from South Pembrokeshire, a boundary drawn inside one Welsh county. The instrument was not blunt. It found a line running through the middle of a single county in Wales. It looked at the Danelaw and it saw nothing. But here is the part nobody talks about. 5 years later, a different team, working not from living people but from ancient bone, found the Danes exactly where the history said they should be. 442 Viking-age genomes from cemeteries across Scandinavia, Britain, Ireland, and the North Atlantic. Published in Nature in 2020 by Ashot Margarian, Daniel Lawson of Bristol, and Eski Willerslev of Copenhagen. Their abstract reports a major influx of Danish ancestry into England. So the settlement happened. The bones say so. And the genetic map of living Britain still cannot see it. Both of those statements are true at once, and this video is about why. This video is going to do 4 things. First, we walk through the actual peer-reviewed studies with journals, years, lead authors, and sample sizes. No clickbait, no speculation dressed up as science. Second, we put the archaeology beside the genetics because the Great Army has been dug up and dated. Third, we explain the one reason the Danelaw is invisible. And fourth, we talk to your own test result. If you are new to the channel, this is what we do here. We dig into the genetic and historical roots of the English-speaking world, and we tell the story straight, without the political games that usually surround this topic. If that sounds like your kind of investigation, hit subscribe. We have hours of related material waiting for you. Now, back to the science. To understand why that result landed the way it did, you have to know what everyone was expecting. The expectation was set in 2002. Michael Wheel and Mark Thomas of University College London published a Y chromosome study in Molecular Biology and Evolution. 313 men from 7 towns along a line from East Anglia to North Wales. The Central English towns came back almost identical to each other, the North Welsh towns sharply different. Their conclusion was an Anglo-Saxon contribution of 50 to 100% to the Central English male gene pool. That number went into the textbooks and stayed there. The first national map came a year later. Christian Capelli, David Goldstein, and James Wilson published a Y chromosome census of the British Isles in Current Biology in 2003, 1,772 Y chromosomes from 25 locations. The Norwegian signal came through hard in Orkney. England came back as one broad continental Germanic input that would not split into Anglo-Saxon and Danish layers. That was the first quiet warning. Nobody heard it, because the answer people wanted was in Wheel's number. Now set the genetics down for a moment, because the history is not ambiguous at all. The great heathen army landed in 865, and within 15 years it had destroyed 3 of England's 4 kingdoms. That army is no longer a line in a chronicle. Dawn Hadley of Sheffield and Julian Richards of York located its winter camp of 872 at Torksey in Lincolnshire, published in The Antiquary's Journal in 2016. The camp covers about 55 hectares. The known enclosure at Repton covers 0.4 of a hectare. They describe several thousand individuals overwintering there. And the finds are not a warband's kit. Silver working, gold working, coin production, textile manufacture, and more than 280 lead gaming pieces. The spindle whorls, the needle cases, the linen smoothers and shears are, in their own phrasing, overwhelmingly found in the graves of females. Women were there. This was not a raid. Their own arithmetic is worth hearing exactly as they put it. If a fleet comprised 50 to 100 longships and each ship had a crew of 30 to 50 warriors, then an army within the range of 1,500 to 5,000 is not implausible. Hold that figure. It is going to matter. The following winter the army was at Repton in Derbyshire. Beneath a mound in the vicarage garden lay the remains of at least 264 people, roughly 80% of them male, most aged between 18 and 45. For 30 years, the radiocarbon dates looked too early to belong to the Great Army. Katrine Jarman of Bristol, with Martin Biddle and Tom Hyam of Oxford, published the answer in Antiquity in 2018. These people had eaten a great deal of seafood, which loads old carbon into bone. Corrected, all dated remains from the charnel deposit are consistent with a single late 9th century event. Then the army stopped being an army. Halfdan's men took Northumbria, Mercia was partitioned, East Anglia was settled. Alfred of Wessex broke Guthrum at Edington in 878, and out of the peace between them came the region an 11th century writer would later call the Danelaw. The word is a label coined after the fact, and the geneticists who use it say so in print. What the settlement left behind is a landscape rewritten. The Old Norse elements, by Thorpe, Thwaite, Toft, Holm, Kirk, run densest around Leicester, Nottingham, Derby, Stamford, and Lincoln. There are hybrid names too, a Norse personal name bolted onto an English ton, marking estates that changed hands. That is the life's work of Kenneth Cameron at Nottingham and Gillian Fellows Jensen at Copenhagen. Matthew Townend at the University of York argued that Old Norse and Old English were close enough that a Dane and an Englishman could understand each other with effort, which is why the borrowing runs through the grammatical core of English rather than the surface, and the violence did not end with the settlement. 2 of the very few Viking-age skeletal groups from England are execution deposits. A pit at Ridgeway Hill near Weymouth held around 50 decapitated young men. Under St. John's College in Oxford, builders found at least 35 men and boys killed on the orders of the King Ethelred in the year 1002. One of them, catalogued as SK 1756, turned out to be a close relative of a man excavated near Otterup in Denmark. A half-brother, an uncle, a nephew, a grandson. The 2 were reunited for an exhibition in Copenhagen, 1,000 years after one of them was killed in an English town. That is the tension of this subject in one image. A Dane murdered in Oxford and his kinsman lying in Finn, provably related by genome, and a national genetic map that cannot find their descendants. So why can it not? The answer arrived in Nature in 2022 from Joscha Gretzinger and Stefan Schiffels at the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig. genome-wide data for 460 medieval Northwest Europeans, including 278 ancient individuals from England. That one paper took the English archaeogenetic record from 8 individuals to 285. Their load-bearing sentence is this: sites from both northern Germany and Denmark are indeed indistinguishable from the early medieval English continental component. The whole North Sea zone was a genetic continuum without major geographical substructure, which precludes further identification of the specific microregions that contributed gene flow to Britain. Read that slowly, because it is the whole video. Denmark sits inside the Anglo-Saxon source zone. The Angles, the Saxons, and the Jutes came from Schleswig-Holstein, Jutland, and the Frisian coast in the 5th and 6th centuries. The Danes came from Jutland and the Danish islands in the 9th. A Danish warrior stepping ashore in Lincolnshire in the 870s was not arriving among strangers. He was arriving among people whose ancestors had left a coastline within a couple of 100 miles of his own. You cannot detect an addition when it matches the thing you are adding it to. The Jobling Laboratory at Leicester said this in print 14 years earlier, and almost nobody listened. In Molecular Biology and Evolution in 2008, Bowden Turi King, the Viking Studies professor Judith Jesch, and Mark Jobling wrote that distinguishing a Danish Viking contribution to more easterly British populations would be difficult, because modern proxies for these two source populations are so similar in their Y chromosomal haplotype compositions. Direct address for a moment to anyone watching who is holding a test result. If your paternal haplogroup came back as R101, you have almost certainly been told online that this is the Viking marker. Here are the frequencies, as set out by Gurdeep Matharu Lal and Mark Jobling at Leicester, in a European Journal of Human Genetics study of 619 R1A1Y chromosomes across 42 populations. Norway, 26%. Sweden, 12%. The paper calls those two the peak. Denmark is not in that peak, and the Danelaw was nominally Danish. It gets sharper. The two branches that dominate Norwegian, Swedish, and Icelandic, R101, were absent from their Danish sample, while most Danish R101 belong to a branch found widely at low frequency across Western Europe. A man in Lincolnshire carrying R101 is more likely to carry a lineage that is Norwegian in origin, or simply Old Western European, than a Danish one. The paper did find one real thing. R1A1 is more common inside the Danelaw than outside it, 6.6% against 4.2%, with a probability value of 0.006. That is a genuine signal. It is also modest, and it does not track the regions with the highest Norwegian and Swedish autosomal ancestry. Their abstract states the position flatly. Autosomal analyses support Norse Viking contributions to parts of Britain, but show no signal corresponding to the Danelaw. If your paternal haplogroup came back as I1, sometimes written IM253, treat it gently. It is common across Scandinavia. It is also present across northern Germany, the Netherlands, Denmark, and England, and it was already in Britain in quantity from the Anglo-Saxon period. It cannot separate a 5th century Angle from a 9th century Dane in your father's line. And there is a limit here that no company can engineer around. AY chromosome traces one line, father to father to father. 10 generations back, that is one ancestor out of 1,024. 40 generations back, at the depth of the Danelaw, it is a single thread out of a number too large to picture. A non-Scandinavian result is not evidence that you have no Viking ancestor. One method has genuinely beaten this problem in England. Bowden and the Leicester team, working with Stephen Harding at Nottingham, sampled men in the Wirral and West Lancashire by surname rather than residence, choosing names documented there in medieval records. Against a modern resident sample estimated at 38% Scandinavian ancestry, the medieval surname samples came back at 47 and 51% for the Wirral, and 51 and 53% for West Lancashire. In that same table, Orkney sits at 50% and Shetland at 41%. The signal exists. Industrial-era migration diluted it below detection, and filtering by old regional surnames partially reverses that. The authors are honest that they assume the non-Celtic contributions are all Scandinavian, so let us bring this down to you. If your family has been in Lincolnshire or the East Riding for as long as anyone can trace, you are living on top of the densest Norse place name landscape in England, and no test will separate your Danish ancestry from your Anglian ancestry. Not because your ancestors were not there, because the two populations were never distinguishable. If your roots are in Orkney or Shetland, your situation is different. Goodacre and colleagues, in Heredity in 2005, estimated Scandinavian ancestry of about 44% for Shetland and about 30% for Orkney, with roughly equal contributions from men and women. That is the fingerprint of families emigrating, not of a raiding party, and it is what survives as a genetic signal. If your line runs through the Wirral or West Lancashire, and you carry a surname documented there before industrialization, you are the one group for whom the published method actually works. If your consumer test came back with a Sweden and Denmark region, understand what you are looking at. Ancestry has acknowledged that it historically over-assigned Denmark to customers with roots in England and the regions around it, and lowered that assignment by adding England subregions. The company is telling you that its Danish signal in English customers is partly an artifact of population similarity. There is no Viking region on any consumer test. And if you have been told your Yorkshire family or your Lincolnshire family or your Northeastern family is Viking because of where you live, this is the part that matters most. The idea that living in the Danelaw is itself evidence of Norse blood is the most comfortable family story in the north and east of England, and the data does not support it. 2,039 deeply rural British genomes, and no Danelaw cluster and no Danish signal, from a method that in the same run resolved Orkney at a quarter Norwegian. A Y chromosome study built to find that signal, finding none, and an army of 1,500 to 5,000 people set against the whole population of 9th century England. That is a hard set of numbers, but they are the numbers the evidence supports. What is false is not the settlement. It is proven by Torksey, by Repton, and by ancient DNA showing a major influx of Danish ancestry into England. What is false is the belief that it made the people of the Danelaw a genetically distinguishable population. It did not, and the reason is not how many Danes came. It is that Denmark and northern Germany are indistinguishable as sources for the early English gene pool. Now, we have to be honest, because honesty is the only thing that gives any of this weight. Leslie and his colleagues reported a failure to detect. That is not a proof of absence. The paper does not say the Danes did not come, and anyone using it to argue the Viking settlement was a myth is misreading it. The ground at Torksey and Repton refutes them physically. The English Viking Age ancient DNA we have is badly biased. The individuals we can sequence come disproportionately from execution and massacre pits. Ridgeway Hill, St. John's College. Those are samples of men who were killed as foreigners, not of the farming communities that stayed and married in. The figure you may have seen, that up to 6% of the modern United Kingdom population carries Viking-associated ancestry against about 10% in Sweden, comes from a press release summarizing the 2020 study. It is not a figure for any individual, and it is not a figure for the Danelaw. Consumer percentages are not measurements of medieval ancestry. Every Scandinavian percentage you have been shown is a similarity score against a panel of living Scandinavian volunteers. 23andMe has added finer Nordic groups inside Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, and keeps revising how many there are, but those are calibrated to the last few hundred years of documented family origin. They will not tell you whether a Scandinavian fragment entered your family in 876 or in 1876. And the deepest limit is arithmetic. Your autosomal DNA is shuffled and halved every generation. Past roughly 8 to 10 generations, most of your genealogical ancestors contribute literally none of your DNA. They are your ancestors, and no measurable piece of them reached you. The Danelaw is around 40 generations back. Almost everyone of long-standing English descent probably does descend from 9th century Scandinavian settlers many times over. Almost nobody can demonstrate it. Finally, the point that has to be said out loud. Genetic preservation is not genetic purity, and purity is not a meaningful concept in population genetics. Every human population is admixed, every single one. The Anglo-Saxons were admixed when they arrived. The Britons they met were admixed. Gretzinger's team found that within single early medieval English cemeteries, individual continental ancestry ranged from 0% to 100%, and they put present-day English ancestry at between a quarter and a little under a half. Mixed villages, not replaced ones. Willerslev put the reframing better than anyone. The results, he said, changed the perception of who a Viking actually was. His team found 2 men in Orkney buried with Viking swords in Viking-style graves who were genetically close to present-day Irish and Scottish people, and may be the earliest Pictish genomes ever sequenced. Viking was an activity and a social role. It was not a bloodline. People became Vikings. So here is what to actually do with this. Run the test, read the regions, move on, then go and do the work that actually answers the question. Family search, free, for the parish registers of your own Danelaw parish. Open Domesday, free, where you can look up your own village and read its landholders in 1086. The Key to English Place Names, run by the Institute for Name Studies at Nottingham, where you can check whether your own town's elements really are Old Norse. The Portable Antiquities Scheme for the finds recorded in your county. And if you want your paternal line placed on a dated branch, a big Y700 result entered into the relevant haplogroup project is the only consumer route that gets close. It gives you a branch, not a percentage, for one line only. There is no Viking Descent Society with documented proof standards. Anyone offering to certify your Viking descent is selling something. The Danes came. They took 3 kingdoms, wintered at Torksey with their women and their gaming pieces, renamed half of Lincolnshire, and pushed their grammar into the spine of the English language. Then they married into a population that had come off the same coastline 400 years before them, and the two became one thing so completely that no instrument we have built can pull them apart again. The map does not match the history because the map was never able to see it. Coming up next, we take this same approach to the other half of the story. If Denmark and northern Germany are indistinguishable, how much of the Britain that was already here survived the people who arrived? The answer is not the one the textbooks gave for a century. The record is in the ground. The rest is in you.